Pacifica Radio, I'm Christina Onnested. Officials in Ukraine say Russian forces launched at least 60 missile strikes across the country today. They reported blasts in at least 4 cities, including the nation's capital, Kiev. Kiev city administration said the capital had withstood one of the biggest rocket attacks launched by Russian forces since they invaded Ukraine nearly 10 months ago. It also said Ukrainian air defense forces shot down 37 of about 40 that entered the city's airspace. A strike on a residential building in central Ukraine killed at least 2 people. President Joe Biden says he will visit sub-Saharan Africa next year, announcing the trip as he wrapped up a U.S.-Africa Leader Summit in Washington, D.C. yesterday. It would be the first visit to sub-Saharan Africa of his presidency. His predecessor, Donald Trump, never visited the continent during his 4 years in office. Biden met with some 47 African leaders. As China and Russia have a growing influence on the continent, he pledged U.S. support for African representation on the UN Security Council and for the African Union to join the G20 group of nations. He also pledged to beef up U.S. aid to the continent.
We plan to commit $55 billion in Africa. That number represents a comprehensive commitment from the United States to invest in Africa's people, Africa's infrastructure, Africa's agriculture, Africa's health system, Africa's security, and more.
Biden announced $165 million in U.S. aid to help sometimes embattled African nations hold free and nonviolent elections next year. The World Health Organization's lead, Dr. Tedros Ghebreyesus Adhanom, gave his year-end speech in Geneva, highlighting accomplishments along with trials and tribulations in global health from COVID-19 to cholera. Christopher Martinez reports.
Worldwide, the number of COVID cases held steady last week, as it did the week before and the week before that. But the one global hotspot is the Americas, largely driven by a rise in the United States, where nearly 3,000 people die each week. The head of the World Health Organization, Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, gave his traditional end-of-year press briefing in Geneva.
We're hopeful that at some point next year, we will be able to say that COVID-19 is no longer a global health emergency. Of course, this virus will not go away.
Tedros notes that in low-income countries, only 1 in 5 people have been vaccinated, while access to things like tests and treatments remains unequal. There are also big gaps in surveillance to track disease spread and new variants. Overall, Tedros says a difficult year is ending with some encouraging news. A global outbreak of Mpox, formerly known as monkeypox, seems to be winding down, and an Ebola outbreak in Uganda could be declared over in January. But there remain other problems, like a hunger crisis facing 47 million people in the Horn of Africa, and cholera outbreaks in 29 countries. I'm Christopher Martinez.
In the U.S., survivors of school shootings from Uvalde, Texas, and gun control advocates testified before a House committee urging stronger gun control measures yesterday, like a ban on semi-automatic weapons to prevent future tragedies. Corinne Smith reports.
Democratic lawmakers played recordings of children's screams and cries for help inside Robb Elementary School last May as an 18-year-old gunman went on a killing spree, shooting 19 students, 2 teachers, and wounding 17 others. Faith Mata's sister Tess was among the 19 children killed in their 4th grade classroom that day.
We waited about 8.5 hours until we found out my sister was among the 21 that were deceased.
Dr. Roy Guerrero is the only pediatrician in Uvalde.
Some were missing limbs, some had holes in their tiny chests. You might mistakenly imagine a funeral where a child lies peacefully in a colorful coffin. But make no mistake, there's no peace in the death of a child by a weapon of war. Guns are now the leading cause of death among children. Yes, it's not the flu or drowning or even car accidents, because we've dealt with that with seatbelts and car seat regulations. AR-type weapons and bump stocks play a devastating role in this tragic statistic. And here we are, still squabbling about who gets to keep what.
Republican lawmakers opposed efforts to curtail gun ownership, citing Second Amendment rights. Instead, they argued school shooters are the result of young men who have grown up without father figures. A ban on semi-automatic weapons becomes more unlikely next year as Republicans are set to take over the House. I'm Corinne Smith.
A second two-day rail strike in a week is underway in the United Kingdom. It comes a day after nurses began a strike amidst a flurry of union actions across the country. A judge's decision is expected today in an appeal from former Black Panther and journalist Mumia Abu-Jamal, who's on death row for the murder of a police officer in Philadelphia. Abu-Jamal has claimed innocence. A judge will decide whether he should get a new trial after lawyers presented new evidence they say counters his conviction more than 40 years ago. And a U.S.-French satellite that will map almost all of the world's surface water has rocketed into the orbit. The satellite will conduct the first global survey of its kind. Besides oceans and seas, it will measure the height and flow of water in millions of lakes and more than 1 million miles of rivers. I'm Christina Onnested reporting for Pacifica Radio.